Thank you. So in today's session, we will be covering the following topics. First, we'll walk through the overarching value proposition of cloud computing from an economic point of view. And next, we'll walk through the specific areas of where we've observed customers realize business value, including business agility, operational resilience, workforce productivity, cost savings, and cost avoidance. I will also walk through customer examples for each of these dimensions. So I'm sure many of you understand the concept of cloud computing, but I'd like to start with a short overview so we begin at the start of the value proposition. So when trying to understand what cloud computing is and the benefits it provides, think about how the Industrial Revolution modernized our manufacturing processes. Back then, businesses had their own generators to power their buildings with electricity. This was a great invention, but it took time to get the generators up and running, and ultimately, businesses were responsible for maintaining those pieces of equipment. When the power grid was developed, it allowed businesses to leverage the resources already procured by a company and, through a fee, gain access to the electricity needed. This also allowed customers to access any additional enhancements or upgrades made to that power grid. So let's fast forward to the 20th century, when companies built their own data centers to run their businesses. This required a large, upfront capital investment, a lengthy procurement cycle, and placed the responsibility of creating, running, and maintaining all the hardware and software for the business on a group of dedicated resources. As a result, businesses had a tough time keeping up with upgrades and introducing new functionality. They were slow to respond to customer needs and changes in the market. With cloud computing, companies are able to host their applications, mission-critical workloads, and special projects on the infrastructure built and maintained by a third-party provider. This allows companies to avoid large, upfront hardware investments and only pay for what they use, similar to a utility. Additionally, customers receive automatic functionality upgrades and access to a platform that has a lot of features. Cloud computing providers such as Amazon Web Services own and maintain the network-connected hardware required for these application services, while customers provision and use what they need via a web application. So what is the underlying value proposition from an economic point of view? Let's quickly walk through the typical way that the public cloud provides value to customers. First, let's assume you have a good view of your predicted demand of IT infrastructure elements, represented by this gray dotted line. In a typical on-premises environment, you would plan for and meet this demand with periodic purchases of hardware and services ahead of when you actually need it, with large capital purchases, often having to go through lengthy prioritization, budgeting, and procurement approval cycles to do this, and you hope that you forecasted demand correctly. But what happens if you didn't forecast demand correctly? The variability in potential demand is shown here in red. So the impact of this is that you either over-provisioned and wasted precious resources, shown here in green as an opportunity cost, or worse, you've under-provisioned and missed out on opportunities, shown here in the red shaded box as lost opportunities. One of the ways moving workloads to the public cloud helps you avoid these pitfalls is giving the ability to flexibly buy only what you need and to scale it only when you need it, essentially matching supply with demand and saving money by doing this. However, cost savings are really only the beginning of the benefits to your business by moving to AWS. So in addition to cost savings and cost avoidance, our customers also realize improved business agility. For example, enabling the ability to deploy new features or entirely new applications faster while reducing the frequency of errors, or increasing your ability to enter or exit new market opportunities much faster. Think about how difficult it is to stand up a new data center or set up a colo-based environment in a new region, and then have to quickly exit or divest from that if it turns out to have been the wrong move for the business. On a smaller scale, better business agility means enabling your ability to increase the pace of experimentation. Things like scalable test dev environments and standing up or standing down new application quickly. better operational resilience. For example, driving improved SLAs on applications, reducing regulatory compliance headaches, reducing unplanned outages that unexpectedly cut revenue or cost money to address. Third, a more productive workforce. For example, improving the efficiency of both your developers and operations staff through shrinking time requirements for each step of a developer's agile workflow and automation of common operational maintenance tasks. Finally, a cornerstone of the overall business benefits to customers are cost savings and cost avoidance. Things like eliminating costly infrastructure refresh programs and a variety of software license maintenance, lowering your unit price for core pieces of underlying infrastructure in the cloud, matching supply with demand to eliminate waste from over-provisioning. I'll delve into each of these categories in detail, one by one. So let's talk about business agility, which is a broad area of value with multiple definitions. Here's one of the ways to think about it in practical terms. One of the most important activities that a healthy business must do in order to continue to grow and innovate is to scope, prioritize, and take on new initiatives. If you start with 20 good ideas, decide to tinker using a test dev environment that you've stood up in 10 minutes on AWS, deploy 10 of them using a flexible AWS-enabled platform, and only 2 are long-term successes, you can easily shut down the others without the pain and wasted resources associated with an inflexible on-premises environment. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but giving your organization the ability to put more of these potential projects into the funnel for consideration is powerful because the speed of realization for these projects is faster and the downstream consequences of failure are much lower. Here's an example of business agility from the Kellogg Company, a $15 billion food and consumer products company. Trade promotion, or promotional costs, is a significant area of spend for the Kellogg Company in the ready-to-eat category. Each day, Kellogg needed to run dozens of complex data simulations on TV ad spend, digital marketing, coupon campaigns, sales commissions, display and shelving costs, but its system only had the capacity to run one simulation a day. Kellogg was looking to increase the velocity of simulations as both the business need for simulations and the amount of data increased. After moving their trade promotion system to AWS, Kellogg was able to increase the number of simulations they could conduct each day, avoid nearly $1 million in new hardware costs for new test dev hardware, vastly accelerate their trade spend analyses, and greatly improve disaster recovery without the need for a new data center. Stover McElwain, former Senior Director of IT Infrastructure Engineering for Kellogg's, said at the conclusion of this migration, "Using AWS lets us develop and deliver business services much more quickly than before, so that we can keep one step ahead of the market." Let's talk about operational resilience in the context of IT, our next pillar. Operationally resilient IT organizations depend on the health of 4 cornerstones. First, operations, security, software, and infrastructure. First, operations. Leveraging automation removes error-prone human elements and hardens existing operational procedures. Enabled ability to manage services from end-to-end, infrastructure support, infrastructure security availability, keeping your applications running smoothly with system-wide visibility into utilization, performance, and operational metrics. Enable enhanced security and governance by automatically checking configuration of AWS resources, and monitor API access to strengthen security and simplify troubleshooting. Second, security, which I will only touch on briefly here in this context, given the topic deserves much more detail in its own session. AWS continuously applies best-of-breed protections to all of our global infrastructure. Leverage AWS automation and tools available to you to mitigate the most severe security risks and resist or eliminate denial of service attacks. Use the Identity Access Management Service to centrally manage users and credentials, helping you reduce or eliminate the existence of rogue servers, and easily leverage our roster of 30-plus compliance certification and accreditations to build secure, compliance-ready environments. Third, software. AWS enables blue-green deployments, allowing for quick rollbacks if issues come up with your deployment using AWS CodeDeploy. You can automate your continuous integration and continuous delivery workflow using AWS Code Pipeline. Resources stay current and secure with OS patching with AWS Managed Services. And you can create and manage a collection of related AWS resources seamlessly using CloudFormation. Finally, building a world-class infrastructure. AWS continues to lead the industry in improving data centers on a massive scale. For example, as a standard, each of our availability zones in each region are redundantly connected to multiple Tier 1 transit providers, and every compute instance is served by 2 independent power sources, each with utility, uninterrupted power supply, and backup generator power. Here's an example of a customer who has been leveraging many of these building blocks effectively. Capital One is one of the nation's largest banks and offers credit cards, checking and savings accounts, auto loans, rewards, and online banking services for consumers and businesses. Capital One is using AWS to reduce its data centers from 8 to 3 by 2018. Capital One is one of the nation's largest banks and offers credit cards, checking and savings accounts, auto loans, rewards, and online banking services for consumers and businesses. The bank is using or experimenting with nearly every AWS service to develop, test, build, and run its most critical workloads, including its new flagship mobile banking application. Rob Alexander, Capital One's Chief Information Officer, said, "The financial service industry attracts some of the worst cyber criminals. We work closely with AWS to develop a security model which we believe enables us to operate more securely in the public cloud than we can in our own data centers." Capital One selected AWS for its security model and for the ability to provision infrastructure on the fly, the elasticity to handle purchasing demands at peak times, its high availability, and its pace of innovation. Now, let's talk about our third pillar of business value, workforce productivity. What we're talking about is moving your workforce out of tactical, undifferentiated heavy lifting around operating a traditional IT enterprise and into strategic, differentiated work over time. You can't flip a switch, and it doesn't happen overnight, but moving to AWS and investing in a DevOps operating model and higher-level services like serverless and Lambda, for example, move you out of the day-to-day operational headaches and firefighting associated with managing IT infrastructure. Let's take a closer look at enabling developers more effectively. The ways AWS can accelerate your activity is to reduce undifferentiated work and time associated with it, like waiting to stand up, test, and build environments, automating testing and defect detection, and introducing the AWS microservices architecture, which are a suite of service-oriented, loosely coupled, and independently updatable and self-contained AWS services working seamlessly together via APIs, coupled with the power of serverless architecture using Lambda. Intuit, and a large pharmaceutical services customer, were able to increase productivity by reducing the time and cost associated with common, undifferentiated work across their environment. In Intuit's case, their senior VP of platform services highlighted how migrating to AWS helped reduce personnel time spent on things like standardization, harmonizing data proliferation, and security hardening, among other things. Finally, to our last pillar, cost. Our customers are saving costs both by reducing everyday operational expenses and by avoiding spending money in the first place. Let's talk about cost avoidance. Think about the typical things in your budget in a traditional IT environment, like hardware maintenance costs, costs associated with OS patching, storage administration, and testing. Then think about reducing or eliminating capital carrying costs associated with large capital investments, facility expansions in the face of unknown demand, hardware refresh programs. All these things add up. Let's start by picking apart how customers achieve this with the flexible AWS pricing model. AWS lets customers pay for exactly the amount of resources they actually use and match supply with actual demand. How does AWS enable this? First, with AWS, customers do not need to invest in hardware and infrastructure before they know the demand. Instead, they can replace that upfront capital expense with lower variable cost. Secondly, there are no minimum commitments required. This flexibility minimizes the need for detailed resource planning by the customer. Customers can start or stop using a service at any time, and no long-term contracts are required. Next, for certain products, customers can invest in reserved capacity. In other words, they pay a one-time low upfront fee, and their on-demand rate is reduced by 28 to 62%. For storage and data transfer, pricing is tiered. The more resources that are used, the less customers pay per gigabyte. Additionally, AWS offers pricing models to support variable and stable workloads. This means customers only pay for what they use. And as AWS continues to expand, it increases the economies of scale and passes those savings on to customers. So cost savings and cost avoidance sound great in principle, but how does this actually work in practice? Let's walk through how this works in reducing the cost of running applications by reducing and simplifying the underlying stack. In a typical owned infrastructure environment, either in a data center or colocation facility, you are paying for the application itself, the operating system, layer, hypervisor, associated storage, which is likely over-provisioned, servers or virtual machines, which are often underutilized, network, hardware, and operational costs, power and cooling. It adds up to a lot of overhead. Moving to AWS abstracts away the majority of these costly components into services that can replace and automate them while drastically reducing costs. Longer term, applications that can be run using microservices like Lambda can reduce costs even further. Reducing costs at the application layer level are very impactful. But how can you continue to drive down overall costs for your organization more holistically once your workloads are deployed on AWS? The lift and shift TCO model, typically used to build a business case to move to cloud, doesn't fully capture the ongoing cost reductions that are possible. Cost optimization over time continues to drive down costs through ongoing improvements. Things like instance right-sizing, improved elasticity, measuring and monitoring and improving your environment. Leveraging managed services, expanding the scope of analysis beyond just compute, like moving databases to a managed database service like AWS RDS, optimization of storage into frequent access hot storage versus infrequent cold storage to reduce cost, and many others. So the initial lift and shift that some customers find easiest to do first is really only the tip of the iceberg in terms of long-term cost savings. Customers of different sizes and verticals have seen tremendous cost savings. News Corp has publicly stated that they've saved over $100 million over 3 years by moving to AWS. This is a company with $90 million in operating income at the time of that statement. So you can see a tremendous impact this has had to their business. Adroll, a large advertising technology services company, stated that it was better able to scale and serve its customers while at the same time reducing fixed and variable costs by over 75%. And GE Oil and Gas made the commitment to go all in on AWS. They found that by being on our platform, they've been able to drive self-service, automation, and cost optimization. These initiatives drove a byproduct of doing the right thing. Tremendous cost savings and cost avoidance opportunities have been realized by customers in industries and companies of different sizes. So let's put this all together. The GE story across all areas we've talked about is really compelling. Business agility, operational resilience, workforce productivity, cost avoidance, and operational cost savings. Note that cost is not the first value driver on the list. GE started by benchmarking how well they performed in what they saw as their key value metrics, and then tracked changes after moving to AWS Cloud. This value analysis has a very tangible bottom line. So with a $14.2 million initial investment over 18 months and organizational focus from the top down and bottom up, they moved over 300 applications and 14 million in year-over-year savings. And this has only grown since this progress snapshot was taken. This is really where the rubber meets the road. Practical implementation on AWS to drive agility, speed, cost savings, reduce cycle time, and adding value to businesses and people. Thank you very much.